welcome to my new little channel. Basically, we're going to be doing history of Liverpool, spooky places, haunted places, the main history of places in general. We're going to be covering the macabre, the spooky, the supernatural, crime, historical figures, cemeteries, graveyards, famous houses, and locations. This is going to be my first video, so expect a lot of glitches and a lot of, well, probably less profanities, but let's see what we can get into. In Liverpool's St James's Garden, which is in Liverpool's Georgian Quarter. This sits below the Anglican Cathedral. It's now public gardens. Many of the gravestones have been removed and turned into a beautiful green space, which is an absolute oasis in the city of Liverpool. Originally, it was a quarry. The sandstone originally was quarried and built some of the most, one of the most well-known buildings within the city. One of them that's still standing now is Liverpool Town Hall. The cemetery officially opened in 1829, and it contains a total of 57,839 bodies, all the burials recorded. Although it was turned into a public garden, all the bodies still remain in situ. A lot of the gravestones were removed, although there's still a lot here. And eventually it became a park when the cemetery closed in 1939. It's now Grade 1 listed park. Now, there's many of Liverpool's early pioneers buried here, from the Keynes brothers who created Keynes Brewery, which is now Red Brick Vintage towards, well, I'm just now up by Upper Parliament Street. Then there was a small woman with no hands. I mean, small as, how do you call it now? Small people. She had no hands and feet. She came from poverty, and she ended up painting pictures for the royal family and other influential people in the Victorian period, using a paintbrush in her mouth, and some of her work's exquisite, and we'll cover her one day. Again, there's the philanthropist Rathbone family. They have a vault here. They were also abolitionists at one point, and they were quite philanthropic within the city of Liverpool. And then the unfortunate guy, William Huskinson, which is namesake of the street, which is up there in the Georgian Quarter. It's named after him. He had the unfortunate mishap of being the first person recorded in history to be run over and killed by a locomotive train. Although there is a documentation of a woman in India, but most records do actually say he was the first one. We'll cover that at a later date because there's so much to cover in this cemetery. And I think I want to do each person their own justice, and I want to do the cemetery itself its own justice. I would hate for me to rush in and do a 20-minute video to try and cover everything. So, I'll cover one person at a time. Today, we're here to visit the grave of Catharine, or Catharine Kitty Wilkinson, known as the Queen of the Bathhouses, and Queen of the Slums, even Saint of the Slums. And basically, she created bathhouses. We'll get into that, but let's do a little walk around, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the history of the place, and we'll start talking about Catharine Kitty Wilkinson, her history. We'll visit her grave, and I'll tell you some more. See you in a minute. So, a little mistake on my part. She was the Saint of the Slums, and she was famous for creating the first washhouses within the city of Liverpool. Now, Catharine Kitty Wilkinson was an Irish migrant and a wife of a labourer who became known as the Saint of the Slums due to her pioneering work in public washhouse movements. In 1832, during the cholera epidemic, she had the only boiler in the neighbourhood, so she invited those with infected clothes or linens to use it, thus saving many lives. This was the first public washhouse in Liverpool. 10 years later, with public funds, her efforts resulted in the opening of a combined washhouse and public baths, the first in the United Kingdom. Such a tranquil place, considering there's so many bodies that lie here. So Wilkinson was born Catherine Stewart to a skilled working class family in Londonderry, Northern Ireland, on the 24th of October, 1785. Her mother worked in spinning and lace making, while her father's occupation is unknown. It is likely, though, that he was a soldier. Wilkinson also had a younger brother and sister. The family set sail to migrate to Liverpool in February 1794, when Kitty was 9 years old. During the passage, the ship mast snapped in a severe storm, and the vessel ran aground on Hoyley Bank at the mouth of the River Mersey. Wilkinson's father and younger sister died, leaving Mrs. Stewart to arrive in Liverpool a widow with 2 young children. At 12 years old, Wilkinson went to work at the cottons mills in Canton, Lancashire, where she was an indented apprentice. At age 20, she left the mill to return to live with her mother in Liverpool, where they both were domestic service. In 1812, she married a sailor, Emmanuel de Monte, although her mother continued to live with her at the Denton Street house. And the Denton Street was towards Great Howard Street, if you know the city of Liverpool. Do you remember the old Echo building with all the mirrors around the side of it? It was there, and it's still sort of there, although I think it's like sort of cut off and it's just a garage now that's there. In 1832, cholera broke out in Liverpool, part of the 1826-1837 cholera pandemic. Wilkinson took the initiative to offer the use of a boiler house and yard to neighbours to wash the clothes at a charge of 1 penny per week, and she showed them how to use a cholera of lime to get them clean. Boiling killed the bacteria. Once these activities came to their attention, Wilkinson was supported by the District Providence Society and William Rathbone. Convinced of the importance of cleanliness in combating disease, she pushed for the establishment of public baths in the poor, so the poor could bathe. In 1842, the combined public baths and the washhouse was opened on Upper Frederick Street in Liverpool. And in 1846, Wilkinson was appointed superintendent of the public baths. This mausoleum, what you see in front of you, is actually the resting place or monument for the guy I mentioned before, William Huskinson, who was ran over by the train and recorded as one of the first the first train death in history. It's quite interesting to see there's a tent over there. It's quite busy today as well. Lots of people about doing peoply things. But yeah, over there is actually a fountain, and I'll take you over to that. It's considered, it's not even a fountain, it's like a leak in the wall. But it's considered the only freshwater spring in Liverpool. I'll say a bit more about that when we get over there. So a little bit more about Kitty towards the end of her life. In 1846, the mayor presented Wilkinson with a silver teapot from Queen Victoria inscribed, the Queen Dowager and Ladies of Liverpool to Catharine Wilkinson, 1846. Wilkinson died in Liverpool and was buried in St James's Cemetery. And now we'll talk to you more about this. Liverpool Hope University has a halls of residence building named after Kitty Wilkinson. In 2012, a marble statue of Kitty Wilkinson was unveiled in St George's Hall in Liverpool. The non-profit Kitty's Laundrette, named after Wilkinson, opened in Everton in 2018. So let's take you to the gravestone. Now, interestingly, her gravestone was vandalised, I think in around May in 2023. 2023 even, and it was restored by Liverpool Council in December 2024. Now, whoever vandalised it literally snapped the whole gravestone in half from the base. Unfortunately, this land is owned by Liverpool City Council, and they have a Friends of St James's Gardens as well. Friends of, which is a group of volunteers who come and clean up and tidy up the place and keep it pretty immaculate considering the lack of funds and resources available, which is quite remarkable. So yeah, here's the gravestone of Catharine Kitty Wilkinson. A lot of people come along from all around the country to the world, maybe, to lay flowers and remember her. On a side note, she is not actually buried at this location, and I think a lot of people think that she is buried at this location, but she's actually not. Looking at maps, I found a print of a map from 1927, I think, an overprint on the St James's Cemetery website, and it shows you the sections where people are buried in numbers, numerical, in sections, like A, B, C, D, E, F, G, etc. Catharine isn't actually buried here. Looking on maps on the St James's website, St James's Cemetery website, someone has put so much due diligence into creating an overlay of the actual cemetery layout from over with a map of 1927, which shows you the sections that people are actually buried in around the cemetery. Which they're all numerical, so like you'll have like D1 or A1, and they go into the thousands. As I said, there's 58,000 odd people buried here. And looking at the maps last night, I managed to find more or less the exact location where she's buried, because they have the register as well. So you can look on the register, it will tell you the kind of location or the name of the place where she might be. And I managed to get it to a place called a section of the cemetery, which is D674. And it's quite close to where we came in, actually. So on the way out, I'll take you to that, because I've not actually myself been on that specific bit before. So yeah, before we go, say again, thank you, Catharine Wilkinson, for everything you did for us and for the world. 11th of November 1860, she died at age 75 in Liverpool. I don't actually have an address of where she died, but I suspect it's the address which I mentioned earlier on. Now I'll take you over to the water fountain and tell you a little bit more about the history of that. So yeah, we'll walk over to the water fountain and we can have a little chat about that. There's actually a signpost over yonder which actually explains the history of the thing. Now bear in mind, everywhere we're walking now and everywhere you're looking around, it was covered, like absolutely covered in gravestones. The path is pretty much accurate up until the point of down here where they've laid some of the gravestones. A lot of the gravestones in the end were actually placed at the southern end of the cemetery, which built sort of an embankment which goes up. It just looks like a dirt embankment now. It's covered by trees. You can't see any of the gravestones, but a lot of them were put there. Some of the most prolific ones were put into the autumn tree, which was the chapter house, sort of, where they had the chapel house where they had funerals prior to this absolutely stunning building, Liverpool Anglican Cathedral, being built. The cemetery predates the cathedral. The cathedral started work, I think, in 1904 and finished in 1978. So yeah, it took a long time to build. But yeah, they don't really have much of a relationship, as in, being the cemetery for the cathedral, the Liverpool Anglican Cathedral. It's not really that. Although John Foster, the guy who designed the chapel house at the top of the cemetery, he designed Rodney Street, some of the major streets and buildings in Liverpool, and he designed the lodge house at the very southern end, which is now a private premises. So yeah, I found that pretty interesting. I'll just do a walk around for a little bit now because there's people by the fountain and we can just have a chat in general. These nooks were actually vaults. And if you go up on another walk I'll do, this whole section is basically a zigzag road that zigzags all the way down. It's for bringing horse and carriages through for the cemetery from the corner of Hope Street and Canning Street, Duke Street. And there's a lot more of these niches and niches up there as well. little bit of graffiti even, graffiti. Wouldn't even call it that anymore. Let's have a look what it says. All men are brothers. Compliance fees tyranny. Free Palestine, UK. I don't agree with the graffiti, but I agree with the sentiment, but that's another topic. So, this fountain thing was completely different in its heyday. It was all very ornate, and it was sort of, it had an iron railing all around it with a little gate. It was in very good condition. You can see the stone, and this is why the water from this is so sought after. It's basically sandstone from the quarrying. Originally, the whole area of the Georgian Quarter was marshland before it was built on. But there's a lot of sandstone, so the water obviously seeps through, and you get this water. Now, the water has a reputation for being able to cure all kinds of different ailments, from rickets to loss of appetite to weakness of eyes, things like that. And there was a doctor who wrote a bit of an essay on it. I think he was on original Hope Street or Rodney Street in the 1800s. And that's where it kind of got its popularity as this magical water. Now, every single day, if you come here, you will find people with bottles of water, filling up water from just this tiny little spring. When it rains a lot more, you get a lot coming out of this one as well. And people will put a leaf on. So I think it's been tested. I'm not too sure. But anyway, so a lot of people come from all around the world for this water. And, you know, you can laugh sometimes and have a joke about it. I remember a few years ago, like you see people here literally every day with even a trolley cart, filling up gallons of it, and they go home and they boil it and they swear by it. Now, I remember meeting this lady here a few years ago now, probably, it could be maybe 8 years ago even. When I used to live on Canning Street, which is just around the corner, because I live in this area. I live on one of the other streets quite close by, and I was speaking to this lady, and she was filling the water up. And she was like, yeah, I've come from Canada. And I'm like, wow, really, for a holiday? She was like, no, just for the day. I'm like, okay. She was like, told me a story. She had stage 4 cancer, and she'd read about the water and its healing properties, and she'd travelled all the way from Canada to come and collect some water in. Now, she didn't have a lot of bottles. She must have probably had maybe two 2-litre bottles, maybe. And she'd come all the way from Canada just to get that. I have no reason to doubt the authenticity of a story, but you can see the desperation in people sometimes to reach out and to grasp at anything to survive. And I think about her often, and I always wonder how she was and how she got on. But yeah, so a lot of people come here. One of the most remarkable things about this cemetery is, you know, sun, rain, hail, snow. It's absolutely just so stunning in every single weather you can imagine. And I spend a lot of time here. I've been spending a lot of time here since I moved around this area. Way back in, originally 1996. Then I left about 2020, and then I finally settled again here in 2011. And I've been here ever since. Right, so I'll take you now to where I believe the maps are accurate, but I just can't, it's really hard to pinpoint the exact location, because I think some of it now is part of the, you know, that steep verge where I know the gravestones are buried under. I think it's possibly around, well, it is possible, it's there, so I'll show you the rough area. But yeah, let's have a look at our fantastic cathedral as well before we go. There's a guy camping in his tent. And we'll do more about the cathedral at a later date, because, as I say, there is so much here to talk about and to look at. You'd do it an injustice with trying to cover just one thing at a time. You know, I don't know how long we've been recording now, but you can see that you can talk a lot about this place. So let's go on a little walkies and discover some more about this remarkable place. I think sometimes as well, we also forget how fortunate we are to have something like this on our doorstep. I don't. I'm very aware of it. I'm very aware of how fortunate we are to have it. But I think sometimes the awe aspect of it might leave you. Because, sometimes when you think and you're walking around, you're looking at things, it's absolutely awe-inspiring. And sometimes maybe I forget that when I'm here. So it's nice to reevaluate that and to look more into it. I'll take you to a little place here now on the way up, where I explained about the track that runs parallel up and down. So it's all behind the ivy. You can not really see it too well, but you will get an idea of it. Over in this area as well in the summer, it's awesome. You get wild garlic growing a lot. Can't really smell it now, but in the height of summer, it's pungent to the degree of you can gag a little bit. Although singularly on its own, it's quite great stuff, isn't it? So yeah, still a lot of cool gravestones. There's people here from the American Civil War as well, captains and generals, there's masons. There's a lot more prolific people from the city buried here as well. Hello, dog. So, all right. So if you look up here now, this is one of the tracks that were originally where the carriages could come down. So straight up there now, we'll take this another day because it's quite a far walk. It does go over the other side, so there's an exit and entrance on each side here. And it zigs down right from the top, comes across and zigs, and then down this way or down that way. And this is where the carriages will come down. Sadly, through time, a lot of this stuff is corroding. And there was recently, I think it was a LiDAR, where they scanned the ground above on that track to see if there was any voids below, so people don't, because a lot of people walk up there. It's a nice place to sit. There's nice grass. So I don't know what that's come back as yet, but I'm sure the findings will be released soon. But how do you keep on maintaining something? Because the sands of time, that's a family crypt with no name on it no more. The sands of time will naturally erode and corrode. I think we're going to be here for a lot longer. It seems to be on the council's agenda to keep this place going up and alive. I'll tell you an interesting story. Years ago, there was a considered idea of putting office blocks in this part. I'll have to dig it out one day because it was definitely talked about, but it never happened, thank God. But I think it would have been criminal to have done that. So again, when we're talking about gravestones, this path now is more or less original. Now, it would have been covered with gravestones here, gravestones throughout there where the wild garlic grows. And this is now where roughly Kitty's grave is. And if I can figure out how to do it, I will put a picture of the map on this plate, in this section of the video, so you can see what I'm talking about. So from my rough estimation, she's literally here in this roundabout here maybe, or even a little bit further in. But considering that it's not mentioned, I've never really heard anyone talk about it either. I think it's quite remarkable that we've managed to find where she is, more or less. I think it's important, and maybe in the future I could talk to someone maybe getting a plaque here or something, because there's so many lost souls and there's so many stories in this cemetery. It was originally a cemetery for wealthy people. You had to have a lot of money to have been buried here. You were up there, you were living the best life, as far as Victorians. And interestingly, on the census, when you look through the census of the maps, you see people's addresses, and they're all pretty much in the Georgian quarter of Liverpool. When this place sort of was coming to its ending, I think a lot of people started getting buried at Everton Necropolis. But yeah, just I'll be quiet for a moment because this is more or less where Kitty is. I think in some aspect it has its charms, being buried here without a gravestone and just being left in peace. You know, the 58,000 plus people that are buried here. Remarkable. Where we're walking up to now is the southern exit. I say well, I'm going to have to start curbing that. The northern entrance exit closes on Monday for some renovation work, apparently. I read it on the signboard before. And it's not going to be open again till about the 28th of September, but that's a whole other story because they don't really know if uses or its original when it was cut either. I think it was probably possibly cut when it was a quarry because it's literally just a tunnel straight through the sandstone. And it has a lot of, we're great, all right, thank you though. We have, it's cut through the sandstone. So, and there's a lot of Georgian and Victorian chiseled men put chisel in the names in, basically their version of graffiti, which, again, it's fantastic stuff, isn't it? You can't beat it. So I'll have to do another story on that stuff as well. Yeah, that kind of about wraps it up now for my first video ever. I was very anxious doing it. You can probably tell. I've been procrastinating over it for quite a while. And I'm glad I did it. They'll get better as we go on. I'm going to concentrate on the Georgian Quarter of Liverpool at the moment and this cemetery. I'll try and put one out at least once a fortnight. And then we'll start spreading our wings around the country and going on different journeys around the country and seeing different things and telling different historical stories, stories of crime, stories of love, stories of passion, ghosts, spooky stuff, heroic stories and, you know, people's histories. So until next time, be good to one another, be good to yourselves as well, most importantly, and there go I, but for the grace of God. See you later.